Chapter 12, getting closer and closer to the end of this textbook. What are we looking at in Chapter 12? We're looking at culture, and we're looking at the process of a media system being created, and understanding that process and the culture, how it influences that process, to better explain a media system in a country rather than using models. That's what this whole chapter is about. It's saying we should walk away from models and embrace a more ethnographic type of work. Now, some of you may have taken anthropology courses and you may be familiar with studies called ethnographies. Ethnographies are when people go into a culture and immerse themselves completely 6 months, 2 years, to be able to better understand and become part of that culture, therefore they can write objectively about it. This chapter is talking about understanding the culture and how involved it is in creating a media system. So in particular, this chapter looks at 3 major points as far as the process of creating media and a media system and how culture is involved in that, and then looks at 4 underlying assumptions about states that the models miss. All right, so our first point of process is order versus change. The author says in order to understand how the media system in a country is, you need to know if the system itself and the government is in the midst of being eroded or maintained. So order eroding or order maintaining, meaning governments and systems can be in the process of being built up, strengthening institutions, or they can be in the process of being torn apart, democratic backsliding. Now, in reality, it is likely that both of these processes are going on at the same time in every single country. However, it's more than likely that both, or rather that one of them, is more powerful than the other. And in order to get change, order eroding has to be stronger than order maintaining powers. So this is important. First, the author says you need to understand which direction the media system is going in the government in general. Is the system being strengthened, or is it being broken apart? So that's our first starting point for understanding media in a country. The second point of the process understanding, micro versus macro. Now, for those of you who've taken economics classes, you know that micro means at the smaller individual level, while macro means at the larger aggregate state, country level, or even the world level. For our purposes here, the author is saying we might be thinking about order change versus order maintaining, but those things we need to realize, where are they happening? Are they happening at the macro level or at the micro level? Meaning, is change taking place at a federal government institutional level? Or is it taking place at an individual level, within society itself? And the author rightfully brings this up because sometimes one person, one individual, can spark a series of events that can erode an entire system away. Tunisia. One person's protest turns into a nation's protest that completely topples the entire regime. That starts at the micro level. And when you see that change at the micro level, the order eroding at the micro level, that can manifest to the system level. Or you can have a system level change going on, like a military coup, like we talked about in Brazil. That's at the top federal level. So it's extremely important that we look to see where order eroding and order maintaining forces are taking place. Micro versus macro. The next point of analysis that the author speaks about is structure and agency. Now, in political science, we use these terms a lot, and I feel in many cases people don't do that good of a job explaining them. So at any point, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, please at me in the forums and ask for me to clarify. So what are we talking about with structures and agents? Structures, we mean institutions, government, media systems, rules and regulations. Agents, we mean individuals, people. The idea here is that the author is talking about media systems, the relationship between media and politics and how they connect, is the manifestation of overlapping relationships between agents and institutions, agents and structures. And the author goes further to talk about that institutions themselves are created by people. People create rules and regulations. And then rules and regulations influence people via socialization. And then those people reinforce or tear down those structures. And it's a circle. And that cyclical relationship of people and their institutions are directly related to culture of the country. The rules and regulations that people follow, the difference between right and wrong in a country, in many cases is directly related to what they believe, what their culture believes is right and wrong. So next we're going to talk about these 4 assumptions coming up and how they influence this process. Now we're looking at the 4 assumptions. In the author's view, the 3 points of the process are really informed by these 4 assumptions. And you have to really look at these and understand what they mean in order to grasp what media and politics really look like in a country. Our first one is that ethnographic and qualitative research is far superior than using models in order to understand what is going on in a country. And that's simply because of point number 2, that the state is a byproduct of the culture of the people. Whenever people come together to form a government, a country, the author's argument is that their cultural beliefs directly influence what laws are put in place. They directly affect who gets what, when, where, and why. That's exactly how we define politics, a discussion of who gets what, when, and where. And the author is saying culture has a lot to do with answering those questions. The third point is that, or third assumption rather, that all hybrid regimes are in a state of flux, going back and forth, back and forth. Hybrid regimes here, we're not talking about hybrids between a parliamentary and presidential system. We're not talking about a hybrid of a constitutional monarchy. We're talking about a hybrid between a democracy and authoritarian regime. The Freedom House scores that are in the middle, the partially free area, the gray zone. That's the hybrid regimes that the author is talking about. And the author is saying that these hybrid regimes are moving constantly around. You have to take that into consideration because since they're moving, it means the rules and regulations of their media system are also changing constantly. And the fourth point, media organizations are sites in which many overlapping interconnected processes feed off of one another. In other words, you can't look at one single variable, or you can't even look at 4 variables: political parallelism, role of the state, journalistic professionalism, media structure. Those 4 variables are overlapping and interconnected in the author's view. But there are so many other ones that are connected as well. So in order to understand media and politics, in order to understand media systems, you have to know that corporations, public versus private, all of it affects each other. And in order to understand that, you need to understand the culture of the people. So let's wrap it all together in another nice little bow. What is it all about? What does it all mean? The author is like process versus models, culture versus models, order and change, order eroding, order maintaining, micro versus macro, structure versus agency. Oh, so much, so interconnected, so messy of an explanation about media and politics in a country. But does the author have a point? See, politics are messy. Media systems are messy. Understanding it is a very complicated thing. So yes, perhaps the author is right. Perhaps these models try to oversimplify a media system. And perhaps culture is one of the best ways to understand what's going on. So you can look through how culture informs the process of the creation of a media system and politics, and thereby dictates the media and politics relationship, all going back to culture. It's a really good argument. I'm very interested to see what you think about this argument. I will say one major point, though, about disagreeing with the author, and it's based on one of the four assumptions. The idea that hybrid regimes are constantly in flux one way or the other. So the gray areas, the partially free countries, generally speaking, this is not true anymore. At one point in time it was, no longer. After the 1990s, when the fall of the Soviet Union took place, a slew of countries started democratizing. However, those countries stopped democratizing a long time ago in many cases, mostly the later 90s and early 2000s. And when they went from authoritarian regime and started democratizing, they stopped in different places in the middle, hybrid regimes. So there's an assumption that these hybrid regimes were still democratizing, when in fact they no longer are. They have become consolidated hybrid regimes. That's an important concept to think about when also taking into account all the other parts of the argument for this chapter. So keep that in mind when we start our discussion in the forums. Talk to you soon.